Okay, today we have gun safety advocate and father to Jamie, one of the Parkland victims who tragically lost her life in 2018, Fred Guttenberg. Fred, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
After having lost your daughter, there have been so many shootings since, to say nothing of Uvalde, which was probably the most wrenching since Parkland. So, first of all, before we get into the political stuff, how are you doing with all of this going on?
Let me answer it this way. And I want to reflect back on your opening where you said father of Jamie, because it really gets to how I'm doing and the impact of these shootings. I'm actually the father of Jesse and Jamie. And everyone always really thinks of those who we lose because of gun violence and those who we bury, but the collateral damage and the impact is far bigger. And so, how am I doing? Listen, this past 10 days or so, however long it was, have been painfully hard. And part of the reason is, and I've talked publicly about this. I was on the phone with my son when my daughter was killed. I was on the phone with my son when he said, "Dad, I'm hearing more bullets." And those were the bullets, the shots that were killing his sister. And I hear those sounds in my head every second of every day. And what happens in moments like we're in now, when these instances of gun violence keep happening, those sounds just stay really loud in my head. Um, and so this has been a really mentally, physically, and emotionally tough week and a half. But I am a father to Jesse and Jamie. I'm a husband to Jen, and I am okay because the three of us still have each other and need each other. And my son is 21, and I intend to be okay and grow old because I want to be around to harass him and make him crazy for a lot of years. But we as a country are messed up and we need to fix this.
On that note, we've heard a lot of excuses for all of these shootings, from mental health issues to video games to doors, and given that we've got 400 million guns, more than half of the guns on the planet, what is your response to these politicians, people like Ted Cruz, who, are desperate to train everyone's attention on anything but the guns, by going on this daily crusade about door control, for example?
My response is we as a country need to make them irrelevant by voting in more people who believe in gun safety. Listen, here's the deal. Mental health is part of reducing gun violence. We should talk about it. We should have a real plan to address it. We should not be defunding mental health. So since you mentioned Ted Cruz and Governor Abbott scream about mental health having an impact on gun violence while their state is cutting $200 million from treating those who have a mental health issue. 2/3 of all gun violence is actually self-inflicted wounds, people who kill themselves. The other third, if you're someone with a mental illness, you're more likely to be a victim of gun violence than a perpetrator. So let's deal with mental health. I'm all in on that. Let's look at violent video games, because you know why there is so much gun violence in video games? Gun manufacturers pay a lot of money to make sure of that because it helps to market guns to kids. And so let's talk about it. Let's be honest about it. But if we're going to work to reduce gun violence, don't just say those things to avoid the conversation of the gun. Let's talk about what we're going to do.
What would you like to see President Biden do by executive order?
Well, he's already done a lot. When you look at ghost guns, when you look at trafficking, when you look at the fact that he's just nominated another ATF director who I think is going to get confirmed, he's already done a lot. But I think we need to look at varieties of other things that can be done through executive action and the failure of legislation and things that deal with ammunition. We've got to see what we can do there through executive order. Now, through executive order, he has already banned imports from Russia, who was flooding our streets with ammunition, and it's working. But we need to do more. I would, if I were the president and I were looking for places to exert executive action, I would be looking there. I would be looking at ways to open up paths to lawsuits in spite of PLACA. I'm not saying bans on AR-15s as much as I have that on my wish list. I wish we could. I also understand the political reality of this country, and I'm more interested in doing whatever we can that will save lives immediately.
We've seen so much polling on the fact that 70, 80, 90% of Americans support so many of these common sense gun safety measures, which includes majorities of Republicans. You can't do this without Republicans, but even, when you look at these numbers, it is majorities across the board. You're an advocate for these reforms. You've engaged a ton of people on both sides of the aisle. What's your experience been like with Republicans as far as these common sense safety measures are concerned?
I have actually I've come to a point of complete clarity in the past week about this, because here's where we are as a country. 80 to 90% do want something done. It's that simple. You have a president who will sign legislation. You have a House of Representatives who is passing legislation through the House, and you have a Senate that 50% of the members of the Senate will vote on legislation that the House is already passing and that the president would sign. So here's my point of clarity. We are now a country where it is not, I won't even say a minority is blocking the majority. You literally have 50 people thwarting the will of America. It is that simple. And honestly, there's nothing I could say to them. If they haven't already seen why this matters, then they are anti-American. They are in no place in a position to refer to themselves as pro-life. They are okay with our children dying. Okay, they are okay with random en masse gun violence. And in fact, the truth is there is a direct connection between gun violence and the risk to democracy. And ultimately, they are okay with that. And so I have nothing to say to them to try and change their mind, because they are that bad and evil. We need to make them irrelevant by putting aside the conventional wisdom about the next election and making sure we all show up and we all turn out. We've done that successfully in the past two elections. We've gone further in the direction of a gun safety majority. This third election, we either finish the job or we go backwards. And going backwards is a risk I'm not prepared to take.
To that exact point, here's what I'm having trouble understanding. We all have our own politics, and that's fine, regardless of your position on taxes or all that, conventional political stuff like you were just referring to. But if you're a parent, how does gun safety not supersede your stance on taxation or gas prices? Like, shouldn't we see Republicans' refusal to budge on desperately needed and popular gun legislation and know that a bipartisan wave of parents is going to punish them? And yet, regardless of that, we still see polling, and it still shows that Republicans are the favorites in the next election. That is what I'm having trouble understanding.
There is no trouble. Let me help you. This is no longer to be thought about in the ways we would typically think about Democratic politics, okay? Because Democratic politics don't apply to that small group of people, that they are authoritarian. This is actually what they want. And we either come to grips with the fact that the Democratic politics and ways of thinking do not apply to what they're thinking about, and focus on making sure we turn out to kill their impact on our lives, okay, because that's what we need to do. Or we're looking at the potential of democracy no longer being a part of our daily lives. And this is an issue which makes that crystal clear for people, where that group of senators stands in the way of what the majority wants. But you can apply this thinking to so many other issues. You just went through a whole list. It's not that the majority of people don't want this. It's that the majority of people don't show up and vote for it. And we end up with this. And so this is the election where that becomes crystal clear for people and they show up and vote, or we can't fix things like this.
Have you spoken to any Republican voters for whom this was enough of a foundational issue, an important enough issue that it did supersede all the other political bullshit that we look toward in a regular election?
Absolutely, and across the country, and they agree. And it's the reason why I've become so friendly with Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh, because he's out there delivering the same message as me, because he understands the risk. He understands the threat. And, it's the reason why I become friends with other people who work in the former administration, who are out there publicly speaking because they understand the risk and threat. When I go across this country, I have gun owners, I have Republicans, I have gun owners and Republicans in communities across America where supposedly they're 100% red, who come up to me and say, thank you for what you're doing. We support this. And so as long as the country and people across the country continue to feel that way, I have hope, but we better show up and vote.
Fred, what can we do to help your efforts in particular? Is there anything that we can do, that my audience can do to help?
Yeah, it's no longer enough to tell people to show up and vote. Because of voter restrictions, we need to tell them, what are we, 5 months out, 6 months out from the election, that you need to have a voting plan and work on it today. Know your voting plan today. Check your voter registration today. Check your ID today. Know that everything is set and in place so that when you are going to vote, you won't first discover you have a problem, because then it may be too late. And so let's make sure America knows it's not just enough to say, I'm going to vote. Work on your voting plan now, because the last election wasn't the election of our lifetime. We only had to defeat one person. The next election is one where we have to defeat his legacy. This is the election of our lifetime. We need presidential year turnout. And so people, get ready to vote, but set your voting plan today.
We'll leave it there. Fred, thank you for, I know this stuff is, like I said before, wrenchingly difficult, especially for someone like you, but thank you for being a voice for so many people. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.